Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the METS Victoria Export Hub Insights into METS series presented in conjunction with Austmine. I'm Collins Rex. I'm the Victoria METS Export Hub lead, and I'm delighted to be with you this morning with a stellar speaker and a great presentation, which I'm sure you're all going to find riveting and useful, and lots of time for questions at the end as well. So without further ado, let's get straight into it, shall we? I'd like to start today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we meet, which for me is the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Straits Islanders peoples who might be joining us on today's webinar. And for all those of you who are celebrating NAIDOC Week, hope it's a great one, and I hope it's a week of great celebration and also reconciliation. We are delighted today to be joined by Don Duval, who's the CEO of Norcat. Don has spent more than 2 decades leading, growing and transforming organizations and businesses, working with multinational companies, tech startups, academic research institutions, governments and clients around the world. And as CEO of Norcat, he's transformed the organization to become a global, multifaceted enterprise focused on providing programs, services, resources to prepare current and future workers and tech entrepreneurs with the right skills, competencies, and confidence to succeed. Don is also the founder and co-managing partner of the Sudbury Catalyst Fund, which is a unique $5 million co-investment seed capital venture fund based in Sudbury, Ontario. And Don, of course, is also the man on the ground for the Vic METS Hub lead people who want to do business in Canada, which puts him in the perfect position this morning to tell us exactly what you need to be aware of when it comes to that all-important piece of doing business in Canada. So please join me in welcoming Don Duval.
Wonderful. Well, first and foremost, Collins and Grant, thank you for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to sharing some thoughts today, and I appreciate the introduction. As Collins alluded to, the intent of today is to spend about 35 minutes to kind of share some insights into those of you who are interested to, I'll say, navigate or enter the Canadian market with the intent of selling to mining operations within our region. I'm just going to take control here if I can.
You already do, Don?
Yep, I'm just trying to make sure it's fiddle. I can't seem to change it. Oh, there we go. I think I did that. Just by way of background, just a bit of context about Norcat. So as an organization, and this will be relevant to the presentation, we're really guided by what I would call 5 aspirational priorities. And slipping ahead on me here. And as an organization, one of our aspirational priorities of the 5 that's akin to the presentation today really is our goal to be this global one-stop shop for all that is the future of mining technology and innovation. And as a nonprofit innovation center, what is unique about that is that we are the only one in the world that owns and operates an underground mine that is used as a place for technology companies, be they big or small, domestic or international, to do development testing work, so kind of the proverbial R&D part of the equation. And once the intellectual property has been sorted and protected, we then become an extension of this tech company's, I would say, business development, demonstration, call it sales and marketing function, whereby we provide a referenceable operating mine for many customers for their all-important first reference customer. It enables our clients and tech companies to de-risk, the opportunity to sell to the next big, larger scale mining company. And you'll appreciate the importance of that, especially if you're a startup or a small enterprise that has limited brand and visibility in the global mining industry. And I give you a bit of context as to Norcat and the company that I'm the CEO of, really to position the presentation as I am sharing insight based on primary market research, meaning myself and our various team members have very strong connections to the national mining industry across Canada, as well as the supply service ecosystem, not rooted in secondary market research or whatever it might be, but based on the actual experiences that we have in the marketplace. Try to go to the next slide here. Bit of a delay. Try again if that works. Collins, I'm having a little bit of a struggle here. There we go. So I wanted to start by providing a bit of context into the Canadian mining market. And I won't go into the nuance of this slide, but what I think is really important for the supply service ecosystem in the Australian market is to be well aware of the materiality of mining in the Canadian marketplace. And a few key things to highlight. One, in terms of diversity of minerals, it is pretty robust. And if you have a technology or a service or a supply business that is commodity specific, just know that we have a lot of different ones across the entire country. And also it's very geographically dispersed. And there's a pretty interesting mix between surface and underground mining operations across the entire country. Now, the key stat I would encourage you to take away from this is that beyond the 60 minerals and metals that we produce, from a materiality perspective, we have at any given point about 200 large-scale production mines across the country. So it's a fairly material industry from a contribution economically, but from a number of unique mine sites, there's about 200, and you'll appreciate why I emphasize that and why I think that is quite important. Now, more specifically, I want to focus on a specific region within the Canadian marketplace. And for those who have been to Canada before, this is kind of an extraction of Ontario, the province of which I am speaking to you from today. And if you look closely, kind of in the middle, the lower part, I'm actually speaking to you from Sudbury, Ontario, which kind of prides itself as this globally relevant mining and mining supply service ecosystem. And within the province of Ontario, we have about 40 active, large-scale producing mines. And what's interesting about that is if you go back to the former slide, about 200 across Canada, about 40 in the province of Ontario. So, about 20% of the activity happens in Ontario. But just northeast of the province of Ontario, we have Quebec. And that adds about another 30 or so, I would say, large-scale production mines. So in aggregate, about a third of the total operating mine production from an actual entity, operating mine, you have about a third that are really concentrated in the middle of the country. And again, primarily underground hard rock and surface mining, a lot of focus on zinc, copper, nickel, gold, among a variety of other metals. So I highlight this out of the onset that if you are looking for a pathway and trying to get visibility into the market, within Canada, there's a high density and a high concentration of operating mines between Ontario and adjacent to us in Quebec, about a third of all the physical operating sites. Now, the other component I want to highlight on this is that the second bullet from the bottom, as you're thinking about market entry, one interesting nuance, especially in the province of Ontario, is that there is a strong push on localization. And of all the supply services, be it product or services acquired by Ontario mining operations, close to half are sourced from local entities. And the definition of a local entity also includes satellite locales of large global enterprises. But within the mining operation, perhaps, with some of the destabilization at a macro level around the world, you're seeing a bit of pullback and focus on more localization support. And I think that 44% will quickly continue to migrate up as we look for more control over localization and supply chains within the Ontario mining industry. So something to be mindful as you're navigating entry, that having a place or a presence or an incorporated entity on its own or through a distributor downstream, and I'll speak more about that momentarily, is important. And I think it's becoming more important, especially with the global state of affairs. And then the last bullet point that I'll draw your attention to is the bottom one. For those organizations looking to migrate into the Canadian marketplace that has a strategy of local hires to run a local office or a business development role or a maintenance support role for deployed technology, something to keep in mind, especially given the current labor market that is akin to that in Australia. The mining industry in Ontario is well known for paying significantly higher than other skilled labor industries, not only across Ontario, but across Canada. So current state of affairs, given the labor shortage, not only on the skilled labor side, but also on the executive side for mining companies and mining supply service companies, the battle for talent, there's a supply challenge, but even with the supply that is there, there's an expectation that got to pay to play to find those individuals in the mining. There's already an established benchmark and threshold that really leads to that. So I just highlight the Ontario mining market. Again, it's about a fifth of the total mining operations reside in this region. When you add Quebec adjacent to us, it's about a third. There's a strong localization trend. It's continuing given the global state of affairs, and local resources have an expectation of meaningful compensation. And I think the latter two stats are continuing to grow. So for those who are trying to get your head around, the materiality of the supply service ecosystem, what is fascinating, and this is really rooted in a global trend, and I think Australia would echo the same sentiment, whereby, over the last 30, 40, 50 years, these large mining operations have gradually divested their in-house R&D function. Meaning historically, many of these mining companies, as a competitive differentiator, would invest in researchers, engineers, scientists to develop proprietary IP in the form of tangible IP or software or whatever it might be as a competitive differentiator in the market. But that has gradually divested over the last 30, 40, 50 years, meaning no longer do these mining companies, save for a few examples, of course, no longer do they have this robust in-house R&D function where they build their proprietary technologies and solutions. They've now migrated to an outsourced innovation model, especially in the Canadian marketplace, meaning mining companies in Canada still have intractable challenges to solve, but no longer are they independently building them. I'll get into joint development of intellectual property towards the end, but they're now requiring the supply service industry, if you will, to build those products or services to solve those problems. And inherent in that is the sophistication of procurement, and many of you could relate to this, the sophistication of procurement in a very decentralized mining industry, meaning even if you try to approach the corporate of a mining operation that has various different production sites, there's still a very decentralized, somewhat unsophisticated procurement model where you really got to pound the pavement at a grassroots place-based level and speak to each mining manager, mining superintendent, mining operators, whatever it might be, to get traction. And so that segues into the point of the slide, is that within the Canadian marketplace, and it might be debatable that there's others, but there's really three enabling organizations that I would encourage you to learn more about, and happy to facilitate that. And these are essentially supply service associations that have a variety of supply service technology members. And these MSTA and MineConnect specifically, they're nonprofit organizations with the mandate to grow their members of supply service tech companies to better connect them with market opportunities, not only in Canada, but for a strong focus on Canada, but also around the world. So you get a sense of the ecosystem. And I was at a presentation earlier today, and there is a strong feeling backed by data that mining is having its moment now in Canada, heavily rooted in the supply service industry of emerging entrepreneurial ventures, startups, multinational enterprises establishing a presence in the Canadian marketplace. And these associations are busier than ever with growing membership and other mining companies seeking to use them as filters to identify tech that may align to their business operations. The last one on the slide is more of an awareness tool, is a company called Tamarack Mining Services. This is dubbing itself to be the world's first group purchasing organization focused specifically on the global mining industry. And I would encourage you to do a bit of research on this, that if you have products that you are looking to get access to, a large market, fully appreciating, if you're familiar with GPOs, that they'll squeeze you on margins, but they'll make up for it in volume and traction with mining companies. It is something new in the last year and a half, maybe 2 years. They launched during the pandemic, had a bit of a slow start, but now the global mining companies are reaching out to them saying, hey, we would like to do a purchase of some product or service. And Tamarack's job is to aggregate the collective demand among a variety of mining companies, and then source through a few providers that can meet this materiality of demand for said product or service, with the intent of saving the mining companies money, but also providing a larger market opportunity for various suppliers. So these are the 3 organizations right now in Ontario that are getting a fair bit of traction and momentum, that are designed to help connect the supply service tech companies with the mining companies. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't share some insight on this. And this is something I would say that's actually unique to the northern part of Ontario. So obviously, Confederation of Canada, a variety of provinces, many of the federal and provincial programs are designed at a functional level to help support economic prosperity and all the usual buzzwords that you could appreciate. Northern Ontario is unique in Canada in that we have both a provincial pool of capital and a federal pool of capital that are typically administered in the form of non-dilutive grants, meaning you don't have to pay it back, or in some instances, unsecured low-cost debt financing, specifically designed to support economic prosperity in Northern Ontario, where we have about 40 large-scale production mines. And why do I highlight this? Well, as an example on the slide, you can see through the province of Ontario, the agency that administers these grant programs has specifically created a program called the Locate Stream. So a variety of programs, not unusual for various government programs to have multiple different focus areas. But more recently, they have really put a strong push on a pool of grant capital to help for-profit private companies, big or small, to incentivize them through grant capital, not indirect tax benefits, through grant capital that will create economic prosperity in the form of job and or wealth creation, specifically in Northern Ontario. It's a geographically bound pool of capital, and the vast majority of the mines are in the rural region of Northern Ontario. So I highlight this because it is a unique opportunity that if you're thinking about accessing it, check out the Northern Ontario Heritage Fund Corporation and learn about what is available. Similarly to that, FedNor, as the name somewhat implies, Federal Pool of Capital for the North, it is specifically focused on Northern Ontario as well. And they have a whole variety of non-dilutive grant programs or low-cost unsecured debt programs with the intent of companies from the Australian or other global market looking to build in this context, a supply service tech company serving the mining industry. There are countless examples where this pool of money is being administered to incentivize you to be there, and it offsets and de-risks market entry because you can use the money to hire people, to buy capital infrastructure, leasehold improvements. There's a whole capital acquisition of facilities. There's eligibility criteria that evolves, but we now have another 3-year term at the federal government. We now have a 4-year term at the provincial government. Both governments are extremely bullish on supporting the national mining industry. So I could speak more about that later if appropriate. The other thing I want to highlight really paints a picture of how to build your brand and visibility, I would say specifically in the Canadian marketplace. And there's a bit of an air of subjectivity to this, but so not to overwhelm you in the audience watching this, there's really 3 trade shows that I would say are the place to be if you're looking to network and build connections and build your brand in the national mining industry. So the first one is in the town of Timmins, Ontario. It's actually day-to-day quite a small town, maybe 65,000 individuals. But it is in what I would argue is going to be one of the fastest growing mining jurisdictions in the country. It is very much a skilled labor town. It is very much a rural community. But the vibe and excitement around the mining industry potential creates a unique, vibrant buzz that is really worth checking out. And they just had their event a few weeks back. And I can tell you there was at least 3 Australian supply service tech companies at this event. And I think they all would share that it was really enlightening. There was probably 20 to 25 mining companies there, of which probably 2/3 of them actually had a booth with the intent of scouting and identifying emerging tech that might align to their innovation priorities. It's a smaller show in a rural area, but the vibe in Timmins, especially in the gold mining market, is unbelievable. So one I would encourage you to check out if you're into the trade show, brand building, visibility, and networking. The second one, many of you would be familiar with. If not, I would definitely encourage you to check out, is one called PDAC. It is rooted historically in a prospector and developers conference, but it has evolved into a large trade show downtown Toronto, one of the biggest in the world. Typically draws actually significantly more than 20,000 attendees. They're at their peak, they were close to 30,000. Still recovering, obviously, given the current state of global affairs. But the show they had this past June was rescheduled. Typically, it's in March. Not a bad time to be in the Canadian climate. But what I will say, it is used for not only the trade show element, but culturally, if you're into renting a hospitality suite at a nearby hotel, or you're hosting a social event, it is the place where the buyers and sellers can connect en masse, on scale, with the intent of getting business done. It is akin to Mining Expo, but a little bit more manageable from that perspective. And then lastly, CIM in Montreal. This is a show a little bit bigger than the one in Timmins, almost exclusively focused on a supply service trade show. So unlike PDAC that has mining companies raising capital for exploration, this one is exclusively reserved for supply service tech companies, and the typical patrons that attended would be other mining companies, again, scouting and looking for tech. Collectively, these 3 would be the ones I would encourage all foreign supply service companies to attend. I know Australia historically has had a pavilion at the PDAC conference. This year, I don't think it happened, but it is a very highly eminent show to participate in. And then the last thing I'll highlight, fully appreciating that there may be some startups in this cohort that are looking potentially to do an equity raise. The liquidity in venture capital and private equity in the Canadian marketplace, with a priority or maybe a sub-priority, if it's not the number one focus, that are looking to invest in tech that is selling into the mining industry, is probably close to $500 million now. 5 years ago, it was probably 25 million. So there is significant liquidity in the Canadian marketplace if you are looking to expand, if you are looking to scale up and have a presence in the Canadian marketplace. And it's not a prerequisite. Many of these funds are geographically agnostic as to where you are. But knowing that there was a handful of maybe entrepreneurial endeavors participating in the webinar, some startups, just know that the liquidity growth right now for funds looking to invest in tech selling into the mining industry is exceptional. And I'm sure you saw recently, there's the CVC, the Corporate Venture Capital Marketplace, with examples like ArcelorMittal and Vale. They're getting a lot of traction and visibility in the Canadian marketplace. So just being in the community gets you on the watch list. And if you're looking to raise capital, it's a really unique market. The only thing I will say is a lot of these government grant programs are incentivized that if you have a pool of capital that you can contribute, some of the programs have a matching component. They love to match against venture capital and or junior private equity for startups and small to medium enterprises. So I just want to highlight that. If there's any specific questions about that place, I'm happy to talk. And as you can see on the bottom left, we actually administer our own seed capital fund here through NORCAT. So I just wanted to paint a picture that there's a lot of e-enabling organizations in the Ontario marketplace, more specifically, that are designed to incentivize and help and support supply service tech companies serving the mining industry across any jurisdictions that you might be rooted from. So as you're thinking about this from the Australian context, I would encourage you to check out these associations, check out the government pools of capital, look into those trade shows. Those build brand, those provide funding to de-risk market entry. And then subsequent to that, if there's a desire on the venture capital equity side, just know that I've never seen anything quite like it, and it's creating a pretty strong market pool. So I want to spend a bit of time outside of the generalities to share with you what I mentioned at the onset around the primary market research feedback that I can share with you based on this unique perch that I have to essentially listen and observe the interactions between the mining companies looking to solve problems and the supply service tech side building solutions to hopefully solve them. And over the last 10 years, I think these, what I call the top 5, these are the considerations that I think you really have to reflect on if you want to enhance your success of, building a business, making money by selling into the Canadian mining market. And these are nuances that I don't think are specific to the Canadian marketplace, but they're definitely emphasized. So things to think about. First thing is ensuring that you understand alignment and fit to mining companies' innovation priorities. That on the surface most likely is a no-brainer to everyone participating in the webinar. That said, there is an expectation, and I would say a very short level of patience, that if the seller of products do not have an understanding of the centralized challenges and or the decentralized nuances of different problems at different mine sites, coupled with what are near-term priorities and what are long-term priorities within a mining operation, the conversation gets very tiring from the perspective of the mining prospective buyer. They have an expectation that before you sell, you will have spent time and effort. Most often happens at trade shows, but you'll have clarity as to what are some of the challenges. Are those challenges different across different sites? What have you tried? What have you tried and failed? What is working? Understanding the decentralized versus centralized nature, clarifying what are the problems to ensure that you know how you fit. If it's only at one mine site, so be it. Don't push it at the corporate level. And further to that, knowing what are near-term challenges versus long-term is a deep-rooted expectation now of mining operations. And a lot of it, and for those of you who have been on the buy side or worked for a large mining company, it is astounding, given the outsourced innovation model that I've spoke to earlier, the number of calls locally, and I've bore witness to it, that Glencore, KGHM, IM Gold, Barrick, Newmont, I've had the opportunity to actually sit in some of their facilities, and the phone rings multiple times per day with someone trying to sell them something that doesn't have clarity over the problem that it solves at that location of where that person is working. So I can't emphasize that one enough, hence it's number one, because you don't get a lot of chances. Time is precious, and if they feel as though you're not fully aware of what's going on, it becomes a little bit challenging. The second one, and it again is critically important to emphasize, is really understand your narrative and your story. So where this gets challenging, if you are new to selling into the mining industry and you have no brand, it's going to be a long haul. And that will segue into number 3. But if you have a meaningful narrative and you've sold into oil and gas, you've sold into forestry, you've sold into the medical space, or something that has a relevant application that could be sold into mining, you need to really position it that way. They will give you time, they will listen, but if a narrative is not clear to show, A, if you have no reference customer, why on earth should they give you the time? If you have an established business that's new to the mining industry, but you have a strong narrative and in a like industry where comparables and learning outcomes could be applied, you need to think through that through. Again, speaks in tandem to number one, but that story is important. The segue into that is number three. And what I will say here is this is often very difficult for startups, and hence why many startups and small enterprises, and I see it in the Canadian market all the time, many startups selling products into the mining industry go bankrupt. And they go bankrupt because they run out of cash and they just can't endure the seemingly endlessly long sales cycle. Beyond that, it gets a little bit more complicated in that if you want to get the attention, and you do get the attention of a would-be mining company buyer, and it's a new POC that they want to de-risk and validate that it works, be prepared to spend your own money and your own time to put it into a production heading or a heading within a facility to show that that POC will work in their environment and understand how it will integrate and how it might have interoperability with other systems. Now, the caveat to that is we're seeing more of a trend that if you have a POC that is fairly material in terms of cost and it is a long duration, and that I mean usually anything greater than 6 months, most mining companies now have a portion of budget as what they would call development deployment funding. So again, something to think about. You're not going to get paid to do a 2-month installation. I would be shocked if you did. They're going to turn to you and say, you know, let's make that happen. Now, the segue into number 4 is, and this one is, I have many examples and I won't use names, but I'll share a few examples. If you are fortunate to get a POC demonstration within a mining operation, in advance of it, you need to commit and clarify very often in writing that that mining operation will get some form of preferred pricing engagement should the demonstration be successful. We have 2 companies, one from Latin America, one local, who did a POC demonstration. They got paid for it. Each one was about 6 months in duration. One of those companies, seemingly that they're entrenched in this large mining operation, is to be honest with you, is looking to make up margin out of the gate, charging way too much potentially on a cost per unit basis, and is proving problematic that they're actually going to get a purchase order. So be mindful of what that pricing will be, how much sensitivity you have on margin compression to really get that deployment with the hope of building a broader business beyond that. And then the other element to that is be extremely mindful that if there is a deployment and there is preferred pricing, how are you going to maintain a high level of product support and maintenance over the life of that deployed tech? And then the last thing I want to highlight, and I know we have limited time and I could share sentiment or thoughts on all of these, is on-site engagement, especially for new entrants, for startups that are either new to the industry, first customer will happen to be in mining, or if you're an incumbent in another industry looking to get into mining, it is critically important that you spend face time with these mining operations. And you might shrug and go, my goodness, how am I going to do that? Well, I start with the Ontario mining market because it's about 1/5 of all the activity concentrated in one region. There's 40 mines. It is not out of the question to encourage new market entrants to get a car, rent a car, spend 2.5 weeks and drive to every single mine to introduce yourself, what you're doing and how it's going to work, and build those relationships. After you've potentially attended a trade show, you understand alignment and fit, you know how you would cost everything out from a POC, you have an opinion on all of the first 4 points. I myself have done the site visit, I've rented a car, it takes me about 2.5 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. Some of the fly-in ones I haven't been to, but given the concentration and density of mining operations in the province, it is highly encouraged to get in the car, arrange the meetings. Those associations like Mine Connect and MSTA and NORCAT to some respect can help you with that, but it matters. It really matters. And there's only 40 mines. It's not like there's 7,000 of them. So these are considerations that might be intuitive to most, but I just want to give you, perspective on nuances in the Canadian mining market and expectations. The last thing I'll highlight, and I gathered this knowing I was doing this presentation from the Timmins Mining Show and PDAC. CIM was too far in advance and I didn't have this underway, but I very deliberately, but I didn't disclose why I was doing it, try to seek insight from, I think I ended up speaking to about 25 different representatives, probably from about 15 to 18 mining operations. Full disclosure, mostly at the Timmins Mining Show, around what are they thinking about, be it near term or long term. I won't go into these, but if you're building solutions that speak to this, by all means, happy to have a further discussion. But these are some of the primary research discussions that I just conveyed into a PowerPoint slide. Some of them are fascinating. Hydrogen, I had no idea that was there's some fairly material investments going on looking at alternatives for hydrogen on surface. Of course, there are discussions around introducing hydrogen to internal combustion engines underground, real-time hydrolysis to, I won't get into it, but it's kind of interesting. The one lens that I am finding is helping on the sales side, and this is kind of my last point, is I show a picture of this teleremote autonomous vehicle operation on the right. Much like Australia, Canada is in a skilled labor shortage, I would say crisis. We knew it was coming and it's hitting now, hence why labor rates are getting increasingly high. We have a major supply problem. Within the mining operations, the notion of recruiting and attracting and retaining talent is problematic. The reason I highlight this, mining companies will invest in technology, obviously to enhance productivity, safety, drive shareholder value. A different unique spin, only in the last 12 months, I would say, has reared its head. If you can position your product as an emerging technology that would appeal to a young skilled labor worker thinking about a career in the mining industry, that becomes you seem to get an elevated level of attention and maybe a stronger seat at the table to say, look, my teleremote autonomous vehicle system enhances productivity and safety. Equally as important, if you're having a tough time attracting and retaining talent, I know mine workers would love to have this as a job, and therefore it helps on the talent attraction recruiting. So if you think through what products or services you're selling, mining companies are now giving time and airtime to tech companies or service companies that are saying, not only do we have these financial benefits, but we can help you attract and retain talent because this is the job, this is a career that someone could do. So something to think about. I had one last slide, but I won't spend much time on this one. It really just speaks to, and it might not actually let me, must be a delay or something. But the last slide was really just focused, and I'm sure it'll, because I've hit advanced 2 or 3 times here, but the last slide really was just something to focus on this one here, and it's probably going to zoom to the next one because I hit the button 5 times. But keep an eye for Canadian mining companies that are launching these, I'll call them hackathons, or in the middle priority there, middle pillar challenges. This crowdsourcing hackathon model is not new, but I can tell you it's very interesting and somewhat new to the mining industry. So we keep a pulse on them. We actually curate innovation hackathons on behalf of a large mining company where they submit an abstract and we publish it, and we help identify emerging tech companies that can meet those needs. This is growing in the global mining marketplace, and there's a handful of Canadian mining companies that are thinking about this as a method to identify and source. We ran one for Vale last year, and 2 of the 3 companies were from outside of Canada. One of them has a purchase order as a result. So they get business done. So I'll leave it at that. Collins, hopefully I'm on time, but I just wanted to kind of share, a perspective on the, the Canadian mining marketplace, some of the things to think about, and happy to answer any question or address any comments. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Don. And it certainly has been fascinating. And I can tell you that we've had some comments in the chat box from people saying that that's the best presentation they've ever been to. So I think you really hit it out of the park, and more than happy for you all to type some questions in the Q&A box. If you have any for Don, we have another probably 15 minutes or so that we can take questions. So feel free. You have the opportunity now to bounce some ideas off Don, to ask some specific questions, and he'll do all he can to answer them in the time that we have available. So please just type those in the Q&A box. And while you're thinking of doing all of that, I'm going to pass you on to my colleague Grant, who's going to talk to you about a few other bits and pieces that we have coming up that will be of great interest to you as well. And as I get Grant to come back online, also just a reminder that if you are not already, and you're a Victorian-based company, if you are not already a member of the Victorian METS Export Hub, you really should join the hub, because if you join the hub, you also get access to Don's remarkable services in Canada, if that's a market that is of interest to you. So it doesn't cost you anything to join the hub, but you've got this great resource that you have available. I'm going to pass over to you, Grant.
Thank you, Collins, and thanks, Don. That was great. I know I got a lot out of it. And just on that point that Collins made, I've already facilitated a Zoom call between Don and a member of Austmine and the hub, so that was a good meeting, and I think there's further work to come out of that as well. So we'd love you to join if you're not already a member of the hub. We have a number of activities going on, including webinars. We've got a further webinar on the 20th of July, similar to Don, on entering into the Peru market, so that should be another interesting one as well. And we've also got further webinars as part of our ongoing Capability Accelerator program, which as hub members you'd be invited along to as the first instance, so it goes in your diary, so you're first up. These are backed on with one that we did yesterday in our cybersecurity webinar, so we've got another 2 sessions of those, and then we kick into some more webinars going forward with those, with Collins leading those. And Collins, the one that Collins presented yesterday was fantastic. So so you can see the dates there. We've also got a number of upcoming Austmine events as well. So our second supply webinars are coming up, as well as our roadshow. And then we've got Austmine 23, of course, which is in Adelaide on the 9th to 11th. Don't forget about IMARC as well, coming up in November. Now for the Victorians, that actually kicks off on the Wednesday after Cup Day. So I'm sure everyone in Victoria is looking forward to that as well. So that goes 2nd to the 4th. We've also got a number of other events, Austmine events, Victoria-based, as well as all the way in the country. So you can get those. The best way to access all those is straight through the Austmine website. If you're interested in joining the hub, contact Collins or myself, and we can easily get you to join up. There's a short survey you have to fill in, but apart from that, we try to make it as painless as possible. So thank you very much. And I see there's a couple of questions go through, so no one wants to hear me anymore. I'm more interested in Don, so I'll hand back to you, Don. Thank you.
Thanks, Grant. I'll just probably read these out, Don, and then you can answer them. So the first question comes in from Rolf, who says, awesome info. What's the best mechanism to realize on the ground representation in your experience? So would you suggest a local office, hire Canadians, or is there some other mechanism that you would suggest?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So there's obviously no one size fits all. It is not uncommon for, I would say, foreign entities looking for traction to hire local representation, whereby if it's a business development sales role, you would be looking for someone that has a Rolodex that can make introductions. So we do see direct hires of individuals, be it on a part-time basis out of the gate to preserve cash. If you're looking to do a full-time hire in the local market, you can have an incorporated vehicle that's established in Ontario, and then you would qualify for grant funding to potentially pay a portion of that individual's salary to navigate it. And just so everyone is aware, it's a very, very streamlined process. And having worked on and off with various governments for a handful of years, I'm very proud of what the Northern Ontario pools of capital do for that. So again, no one size fits all. The one thing I will caution on, if you have I'm not going to say a commoditized, widget by some respect that could be sold through distributors, be mindful that, and I don't think it's a systemic Canadian problem, and generalizing is reckless, so I hate to do this. But if you have a third-party distributor without the right type of, covenants in the contract for them to represent your brand out of the gate for a product or service that has limited visibility in the Canadian market, I would be cautious that they're not going to do a great job selling your brand, selling your product. There is an expectation, as I made mention, of boots on the ground, building relationships, listening, understanding. And again, I go back to, in the province of Ontario, there's 40 mines. If you're looking for market entry and you have the capacity and the time, effort, resources, and the cash, spend some time understanding exactly what the market is, use that to inform a job profile, post an ad on, whatever platform. There's a whole array of them. We offer one, and test the market to see what's out there. Typically, you'll find a couple of great resources that will work for incentive pay. You can train them, educate them, and they become your representative of kind of a de-risk, low-cost market entry to kind of build on the relationships that you may have established while you were here meeting with each of the mines. Don't go direct to distributor out of the gate. It has worked, and that's why I said generalizations are reckless, but there is an expectation of a bit of a higher touch model. So all of the above could potentially work, but those are just considerations I would think of.
Thank you. And two-part question from Ryan. Ryan asks, what insights can you share regarding challenges associated with introducing new technology and resistance to change by existing workforces? And are you seeing these barriers being removed with a younger generation joining the industry?
That's two great questions. The first half, what's a real common narrative? And I would actually be curious if the Australian market's the same. But in terms of change management, there's two things to reflect on. One, it is very common for a corporate head of technology and innovation for any big mining company to get really jazzed when they meet a supply service tech company with a product saying, this is great. And that in-house ability to sell at a decentralized level is always fraught with challenges. It's a healthy tension. Typically, what I would suggest is that, let me go back to one other point. Keep in mind, as an outsourced innovation model, it's not, I hate to use the term relatively, but this gradual divestiture of in-house R&D has given rise to this outsourced innovation model, meaning to solve problems, the mining companies need to buy it. The sophistication of procurement, how they do joint product development, how they manage a proof of concept where they might have to disrupt production to give you a chance to get a heading and access equipment. That isn't a sophisticated program yet. It's laborious, it's problematic. Other industries like in the finance, especially insurance and banking, are so sophisticated now on how they give supply service companies a chance to transform their industry. Legacy industries, mining included, still aren't quite there because they used to build it. Now they have to buy it. So I would ready yourself that you need to spend the time at a decentralized level to build champions, to let it bubble up while concurrently working on the corporate level. Otherwise, you might run out, if you're a small startup or a small enterprise, your entity might be challenging in the marketplace. Now, the second half of the equation, or your question rather, yeah, absolutely. The younger generation right now, especially, and I don't know the Australian context, but high school, college, and university kids in Canada right now do not want to work in the mining industry because of a preconceived notion or paradigm as to what a career looks like. So there is a huge push on educating, inspiring that community of would-be mine workers, be it on the supply service side, mining contracting side, and or in the mining companies themselves, that this is what a mining career could look like. And now we're starting to see this younger generation has expectations that they're going to have a job that looks like this. If they know that they can be a teleremote autonomous vehicle operator sitting in a command center in an urban center while operating a piece of machinery that's in a fly-in, fly-out community, not only are they now interested, but you can actually pay them less. Believe it or not, money is no longer the most important driver in most developed economies. The quality of life, the impact, what the mining company is doing. And for an older generation, you might find it hard to believe, but it's absolutely true, and we have demonstrable examples.
I think that's asked and answered, Don. Thank you very much. Question from Rolf, who asks, where is social license on the priority scale of problems to solve?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, shareholders, especially the institutional investors in mining companies, are putting more and more pressure on the social license to operate. And I think boards of the mining companies, especially Canadian headquartered companies with operations around the world, that engagement, diversity and inclusion, impact benefit agreements with Indigenous communities. I think there was a survey done by EY, I don't know if it was last year or the year prior, that said that is one of the most important, if not the most important priority that mining companies are navigating right now. So You know, if your product or service has some ability to influence that for the positive, you would get elevated attention within a mining operation. Absolutely. Again, I think the survey showed it might be the most important element in the 2021 survey that EY did.
And then two different questions, but probably related in many ways. So the one question is, does Canada have foreign ownership restrictions for local entities? And then hand in hand with that one goes, what about the legal frame as per Canadian law for Australian companies wanting to operate in Canada? So here we go again to local or foreign manpower, legal entities, tax exemption. So essentially, what can you do as an Australian-owned business when you set up an entity in Canada?
Yeah. So the ability to, so the foreign direct ownership, there's different constraints by different industries, different provinces, federal, and it's very different. And I don't know the full answers to all of that. You know, more particular to the latter half of the equation, if you are looking to establish a presence in the, and again, I'll be specific, in the Ontario mining marketplace, and there's countless examples and entities that can facilitate and support this. Establishing a bank account, you know, a payroll system, establishing an incorporated entity that has, you know, all the, you know, tax protocols is actually quite easy, especially in Northern Ontario. You know, the labor laws, you know, are fairly straightforward. What often we see is many of these companies, more so from Latin America, that are looking at this and understanding, you know, for example, tax implications. The likes of, you know, EY as an example of a, you know, a marquee professional services provider scattered throughout Australia. Very often we encourage entities, again, even in the context of Latin America, reach out to a professional services firm, ask them about, you know, what does it take? What are the considerations of migrating to that, you know, jurisdiction? And they can give you almost like canned booklets that describe all the things that you need to know. So I'm happy to help with that and make introductions, but the notion of establishing an entity, you know, even hiring one person, I go back to that grant pool of capital. If you're committed to driving economic prosperity geographically bound in Northern Ontario, there is a seemingly disproportionate amount of access to grant capital if you're there with an incorporated entity, you know, hiring people. And so something to consider.
Thanks very much. And then one more question. One of the most significant barriers to entry is the North American products liability insurance, significantly cost prohibitive. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, some of that might be rooted in the lovely litigious society of the US. Canada's a little bit different. I would say it's not quite as bad, but I appreciate the question. And very often we get associated directly with some of the litigious cultural elements of the US. Yeah, you need to be mindful of general liability. And for those who aren't familiar, essentially, if you have a product or service and something explodes or goes wrong and hurts someone, or even worse, you need to have the appropriate insurances. And again, there's mechanisms to learn all about that. In addition, you know, you want to think about D&O insurance. Again, directors and officers for parent co. Again, there's a whole series of I would say, relatively simple, you know, books or papers that professional services firm can provide you on that. One thing to think about beyond general liability, and one that's actually growing in the Canadian marketplace for supply service tech companies, relates to something called E&O insurance. If you're not familiar with it, errors and omissions. And I will give you an example whereby if you have a product and you are building a specification OEM user manual on how it needs to be used, and you omit some important information as judged by the court, or you have an error and that would-be operator is using it to the spec, and any reasonable person would have assumed that you would have included some information that they ought to have known or should have known. There's a whole new emerging category. It's not emerging; it's been around for years and years, but there's a level of elevated importance of making sure that how the person uses your tech in a reliable way, that you have all the reasonable information and there's no errors, and you haven't omitted anything that a court would deem to be obvious. So there are all of the insurances. Candidly speaking, obviously we we have a significant amount of E&O insurance. We have a significant amount of general liability. We have a significant amount of D&O insurance. And in aggregate, I don't know the total dollar amount, but it's totally manageable. If, you know, in the Canadian context, I will say this, we have products and services that we sell into the into the United States through different parts of our business. And it is more expensive for just cultural reasons in that market, but it is not insurmountable. I don't know if you have data to suggest otherwise, but we have startups that have meaningful general liability, E&O and D&O insurance that are venture backed, maybe, you know, pre-revenue, maybe $1 million in the bank, and they can afford all of the insurances. And it's a prerequisite. Any mining company is going to validate that you have all of this before you go underground or on surface.
I think that's asked and answered quite comprehensively, Don. Thank you very much. We do have the opportunity for you to ask one more question if there is one more. So feel free to type it in the chat box. And while you're thinking of that one final question, I'll pass you back to my colleague Grant to keep an eye on that question panel. Doesn't look as if anything else is coming in. And if there nothing else comes in, Grant, I'll pass back to you to officially draw today's proceedings to a close.
Oh, thank you, Collins. What a privilege. It's been, as I said previously, it's been a great webinar. I know a lot of members have got a lot of things out of it. Don, I think you'll be getting some further commentary and questions post this. Probably the best way if you want to get in contact with Don is to contact Collins or myself, and then we can then facilitate that. I know Don's a busy man. He doesn't need every Australian METS company into contacting him directly, so it's probably better off to come through Collins or I, and then we can facilitate the meetings going forward. There, as I said, we did one last week, which proved to be quite interesting and also very, very good, relevant for the member as well. So I think that's worthwhile. There seems to be one more question coming in, Collins. How's that? Much appreciated. It's always good to get, isn't it, Collins? It's not asked for, but it's nice anyway.
We aim to please.
That's right. We do indeed. So I guess with that, Collins, that might be about it. I think we're coming close to time. So yeah, that might be about it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Grant, and thanks again, Don. It was fabulous, and
thank you, Don.
lots and lots of really useful information. Look forward to sharing the deck and so on with members. Thank you, and have a great day, everybody, and a great evening, Don.
Yes. Good evening,
Thanks
Don.
all.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Have a good day. Have a good Wednesday. Thanks. Ciao.
Cheerio. Bye-bye.
Bye.